Take it easy. Take it easy. I got you. Take it easy.
All right, creatures of the night and everybody out there in the pod street crew. My name is Alex Doriot, one half of the Talking Taker podcast, and I am welcoming you to another edition of Digging Up the Dead Man here on the Talking Taker YouTube channel. Very important edition as well. As you know, this YouTube show, a little supplement to the Talking Taker podcast where I unbox, open up figures of The Undertaker himself, as well as additions to the Undertaker, Talking Taker, opponents, Rogues Gallery collection here. I've been doing these videos for a couple of years. Of course, I've been adding to the collection for a couple of years before that. And this is a huge moment right here because I am technically completing the Talking Taker Opponents collection here with the addition of these exclusive figures from Ringside Collection, their new bell-to-bell collection featuring the Steiner brothers, The Undertaker's tag team partners for one of his early pay-per-view matches, Survivor Series 1993, when the All-Americans took on the Foreign Fanatics. So a little bit of background here, in case you don't know. Of course, Talking Taker, the podcast, my partner and I, Travis White, we started it in 2017. The goal was to have an episode dedicated to every single one of The Undertaker's pay-per-view matches across his, at the time, it was a 27-year career, turned into a 30-year career by the time that we finished it. But yeah, we would chart his career, chart his journey through covering a different pay-per-view match in every episode. And about a year after we started, another podcast started, the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast, hosted by Matt Cardona and Brian Myers, that I became a huge fan of. And it got me wanting to reconnect with my childhood love of action figures, which I still had a good collection of, but hadn't touched in a long time. They've been in my parents' attic. So I dug them out. I had a lot of figures representing Undertaker and his many opponents, and I thought that would be a great way to get back into action figure collecting. I'm not just going to become an Undertaker figure completist because that would be nearly impossible. Just ask a friend of the show, Steven Zeman of the Collecting Dead Man podcast. But I thought it would be more fun and more exciting to do an action figure to represent every episode of our podcast, to represent all of those pay-per-view opponents, over 170 of those pay-per-view opponents. Of course, some of them were the same the same opponent, so I wouldn't have to get a figure to represent every match, but at least one of every guy he faced or teamed with or teamed up against in a pay-per-view match throughout his career. Of course, some of those were hard to get, some of those were hard to come by, and also, you know, I'm not like I didn't need to do it all at once, so it took me a few years, but that's because, you know, I would dabble in it and then not dabble in it. Sometimes I didn't have the money to, you know, be spending on action figure purchases and things like that. Plus, it was fun to just stretch it out. I didn't feel like I needed to jump on eBay and get every figure all at once. It was fun to go to toy stores and you know, and search for good deals and things like that. So slowly, I've had like the final 10 or so that have been taking me a while to get to. Some of them were rare, and then some of them were just, you know, not that exciting or fun to get, like the Big Show. I dragged my feet on getting a Big Show figure. Finally got one of his. But the Steiner brothers. So obviously, Rick and Scott Steiner, two legends, two WWE Hall of Famers. They've had lots of figures throughout the year, but honestly, not a ton of Steiner brothers figures. They had their WCW Galoob figures, which are pretty cool. And then they had a Hasbro figure. Each one of them had a Hasbro figure. And then after that, they had some WCW San Francisco Toy Makers figures that were not like in the classic Steiner Brothers gear. They were like solid color red. I believe both of them were the red color gear. So that wouldn't quite look right to represent a 93 Steiner Brothers. That's one of the things I've done in the collection is try to have it as accurate. If I can get it accurate to a match, that's great. Or if I can get it close to accurate, you know, I'll go with that if it's not perfect. But yeah, the only real options were those Galoob figures and the Hasbro figures. Now, the Hasbro figures, kind of pricey. Weirdly, I think I want to say the Scott, not too bad. The Rick is oddly really, really pricey to find a good quality one of those. And then the Galoob figures, not quite as pricey, although it is the opposite. Like the Rick is easier to come by, and the Scott is more expensive for some reason. But a problem with those WCW Galoob figures, you can see my my Lex Luger one up here. And if you ever had these figures, you know the paint scratches off of those horribly. If you played with those at all, you definitely got scratches and scuffs and paint coming off of those. So it was hard to find one of those or both of those in good condition. I would have been fine with adding those to the collection, but to find one of those in good condition that wasn't crazy expensive was nearly impossible to do. So when the Steiner Brothers signed WWE Legends deals last year, I got excited. Okay, maybe we're going to get some Mattel classic Steiner Brothers figures. But, oh no, Ringside Collectibles beat them to the punch with these Rimco-inspired Steiner Brothers figures. They actually released 2 different ones, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want. This is exactly era of Steiner Brothers I want. It's a new, fun, exciting toy line I can support. I love this style of figures. This will be perfect. And they were, like I said, they released 2 different versions with 2 different gears. Neither of them perfectly match the Steiner Brothers at Survivor Series 1993, because if you remember, they're on the All-Americans team. They're wearing Stars and Stripes. They're wearing patriotic gear. I'd love to see some figures like that sometime, but those have never been released. Probably won't be. It's kind of an obscure pull on there. But I did pull up the pay-per-view, and I looked at it, and I ensured that these jackets are the ones that they're wearing at that pay-per-view. So, you know, the Steiner Brothers had their Michigan Letterman's jackets. Of course, Ringside Collectibles can't put that Michigan M on the jacket because of the trademark here. But they're wearing, you know, the navy with sort of the beige khaki color on the jacket, sort of that faded leather color on the jackets. They're not wearing like the real Michigan jackets with yellow and blue colors on there, which is what the other figures that Ringside released are wearing. So these jackets are closer, and you know, they're not Stars and Stripes, but it's like, you know, sort of more of a solid gear, rather, as opposed to, you know, Steiner Brothers famously had just some of the most, you know, 80s, 90s neon, like crazy colors, crazy patterns and designs on their figures. And that's what the other packaging of Ringside, what they released, represents. And I love those. I would love to have those, but I thought, man, these jackets represent it that night the closest, and I guess the gear, I guess, would kind of be the closest, so that's what I decided to go with here. And the cool thing about these is they also match up with your Undertaker Superstars figure, which I did an unboxing on here a couple years ago. I love the Superstars. I love the Superstars line, and you can match the Steiner Brothers up with the Undertaker Superstars figure, and you can almost complete that Survivor Series 93 team. You could get the Lex Luger Mattel Retro that came out and put it with this team. That would be pretty close. But I'm hoping maybe Mattel will release a Lex Luger Superstars figure in that All-American gear. That would fit the time period that they've been going for with those releases. That's a guy they've got under contract, so they could do. So I would love to see that and to complete the All-Americans team. But let's check these figures out, man. A really cool addition here. Obviously, it's significant because it's completing my collection here. So I'm very excited to open these. Love the design. I love the drawings on the back. A lot of text on the back here. Let's check it out. The incomparable team of Rick and Scott Steiner have flexed their legendary wrestling skill all over the world as the Steiner Brothers. These powerhouse siblings have made their way across multiple wrestling promotions, dominating opponents with a major offense built on a foundation of traditional wrestling training. With Scott sporting classically long hair and Rick famously wearing wrestling headgear, I don't know why we need to talk about Scott's mullet on here, but we're doing it. We're mentioning that on here. Their wrestling gear always inspired with bright, wildly colored singlets. Whether it's the Steiner drop or a Steiner recliner on an opponent, the odds are in the favor of the brothers from Detroit. Should have said Frankensteiner on here, because Scott wasn't doing the Steiner recliner back then. He was doing the Frankensteiner, famously, which was an amazing move back then. So, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 on the text on the back, but, I appreciate it. And again, I love that drawing, love that look on here. Let's crack them open. All right, again, this is real sturdy, real solid packaging. I love it. It's not flimsy. It's not falling apart. That's better than a lot of the Mattel packaging here. But pops right off. let's have a look at them. Oh man, these are awesome. Take a look. Rick and Scott, that classic late 80s, early 90s Steiner brother looks right here. We're not talking about Freaksilla. We're not talking about Big Papa Pump. We're talking about this Scott Steiner here with the mullet, of course, and Rick Steiner with that signature headgear and the jackets. Let's take them one by one. Let's do Rick here. Jackets is cool. They're like two different kinds of material, as you can kind of see here. This one's sort of like a pleather material here, and this is more of a fabric on here, just like a real Letterman's jacket would be. And great likeness for this style of figure. I mean, that is spot on. That is perfect. I always thought the headgear was unique. Not necessarily cool, but it's definitely unique and made Rick stand out. I don't like any other wrestlers that do it, though. There's a guy in Impact Wrestling, TNA Wrestling now, Josh Alexander. Don't like it on him. I don't know, man. That's Rick Steiner's thing. It should stay Rick Steiner's thing, but that's just my opinion. Jacket is Velcro, so, that pops right off. And there's some gear, man. Not as cool as the other gear, as the real colorful gear, but for my collection, it works. Compared to the Superstars figure, it's not exact. It's not an exact comparison. The Superstars figures' knees have joints. These do not. The ankles have a joint on here. The bell-to-bell figures do not have that. So this is definitely more... this is an updated version of like a Remco style, AWA style, old school figure. This is more of a classic version of that. And boy, I don't know... I'm not sure the parts are swappable on these. I know you could kind of probably mix and match the parts on some of these. I don't think you can really do that on these, but that's fine. That's not something I'm interested in, but just something to say here. Yeah, it doesn't feel like anything pops off on these, but it's got that exaggerated, torso and arms on here. Although the Steiners were definitely jacked, it's definitely a little exaggerated, but man, what more can you say? They're basic, they're simple, but that's what makes them cool. That's what makes them unique and retro. And I think the reason I wanted to get the ones with the correct jackets is I think you got to leave the jackets displayed on these. At least I'm going to on here. I think when I think of the Steiner brothers from this era, I think of them walking out with the Letterman jackets. That was such a important, unique part of their character, such a signature part of theirs. So I'm going to leave those on. Sidebar, did you have a Letterman's jacket when you went to high school or middle school? Any of you out there? I did not. I never had one. Of course, I wasn't an athlete. I certainly didn't have one on the sports team. But the funny thing is, when I was in school in the 90s, in 2000, 2004 is when I went to high school. To me, it was always like the nerds who had Letterman's jackets. Letterman's jackets were not cool anymore when I was in high school, which is funny because, watching Saved by the Bell or watching movies, it was always the jocks, the star football players or basketball players that were wearing Letterman's jackets, not Leatherman's jackets. And when I was in school, it was always the band geeks. They were the only ones that really wore Letterman jackets, not any of the cool kids in school. And I say that as a theater geek. I certainly was not a cool kid in high school myself. Still not a cool kid as I sit here making videos about action figures in my late 30s. So really, I don't have much room to talk. But yeah, as a fellow geek, I would say the only people who really had Letterman jackets when I was in school were kind of geeky. But I mean, it looked cool on the Steiner brothers, and I would never call this guy a geek. I would never call Scott Steiner a geek. But again, probably not too much to say here on the review. You take the jacket off, and looks like pretty much, maybe not exactly the same body. And Scott's got different arms here, I think. Man, let's take a look. Yeah, so different arms, definitely. And the arms are, again, all one piece. There are no joint on the elbow or anything like that. But it looks like basically the same body, same legs, just different heads and different arms. I feel like that's pretty accurate, although did Scott wear elbow pads? He must have worn elbow pads sometimes. and Rick's got the wrist tape. I know he definitely wore the wrist tape. And the weird thing about Rick that I remember is he would tape some of his fingers together. I think he taped them almost like a Vader V. Is that right? Am I remembering that right? But he always did something really funky when taping his fingers. I don't know what that was all about. If he had a finger injury or something like that, I don't recall. But definitely, again, it was something that stood out and I thought was unique. And I definitely noticed as a kid. Here we go. Check it back on. Great likeness. This is 90s Scott Steiner right here. I mean, the Steiner brothers were... They might still be. If they're not my favorite tag team of all time, they're top 5, maybe top 3 for me. There's nothing I enjoy more than watching a Steiner brothers 80s or 90s squash match. Or just any kind of Steiner brothers match where they are just unloading on some nasty suplexes. Scotty hitting that Steiner screwdriver. I mean, the Frankensteiner blew my mind. I mean, it's still amazing to see a guy his size just hitting that, just snap Hurricane Rana Frankensteiner. It was always incredible, still is incredible. Steiner Brothers versus Head Shrinkers, WrestleMania 93, underrated match. Go check it out on Peacock if you haven't seen that one in a while. Just some hard-hitting moves, crazy bumps, crazy action in that match. One of the first pieces, if not the first piece of wrestling merch I ever owned was some Steiner Brothers wristbands that I got from the WWF catalog at the time. It was those and the Bret Hart sunglasses. That's what I ordered, or my mom ordered for me. I guess that's what I wanted. That's what I requested. And I wore those wristbands out. I think I wore the logos off of them. I wore them so much. I don't know. They may be up in an attic somewhere. I'd love to find those official merch. They were like blue and yellow Michigan colors. Those things were awesome. I still have the Bret Hart sunglasses. I don't have the Steiner Brothers wristbands. I'd love to find those one day. But loved them back then. Here they are. Let me get the jacket back on. But here they are with the dead man. So like I said, you can recreate Survivor Series 93. And who wouldn't want to recreate that? Here we are almost 30 years. 31 years now. Here we are in 2024, 31 years after the fact. Maybe not so much the most significant match of The Undertaker's career, not the most significant partners or opponents for The Undertaker, but for me, it is going to have a huge sentimental part because this completes the collection. I'm going to throw them up here on the 90s shelf, and that does it. I have a figure to represent every single one of The Undertaker's pay-per-view opponents or partners across his 30-year career. Now, does that mean I'm done collecting? Of course not. There's still plenty of great Undertaker figures that are going to be coming out in the years to come. And honestly, there's some upgrades I want to make. Some of these are not ideal. Some of these are not perfect, and there's going to be better versions coming out, better versions that I can look for in stores, some new additions that I can make on there. Like, for example, Mattel is going to be putting out an updated Executioner figure in the year of our Lord 2024. So, I gotta pick that one up because that's one of the Undertaker's most obscure opponents. That was the only pay-per-view match Executioner ever had was against the Undertaker. So, I gotta get an elite Executioner figure. So there's gonna be things like that I pick up through the years, random merch stuff. So continue to be on the lookout here on the Talking Taker YouTube channel. We will have even more stuff and even more videos coming to you if you enjoy these. And I encourage you to check out the next episode of Talking Taker that's going to be coming out on February 1st, where Travis and we're going to go back to the 90s. We're going to go back to this era, and we're going to cover some of The Undertaker's classic Coliseum video matches. Round 2 of us doing that. That'll be out on February 1st. And I'm going to do something very special on that episode as well, because I have, I said this completes the collection, because it is. This is the latest figures that I have bought. But I bought another opponent of The Undertaker a few months back, and I have been saving that to do an unboxing on here for a while. So I'm actually going to do that live on the podcast. But you can find that video version of the podcast right here on the Talking Taker YouTube channel. So make sure you're subscribed and looking out for that when it comes out on February 1st. Let me know what you think of the Steiner Brothers Ringside Collectibles Bell to Bell figures. Who else would you like to see in that line? Did you pick them up? What do you think about them? Leave a comment below. I think now that the collection is complete, I think my goal for February or maybe March, I got to do a little bit of cleaning down here in the basement, in the Dead Man Cave. I want to do a full toy room tour here of the Dead Man Cave. Go through the collection and go through the walls that you don't see around me because they are filled with Undertaker merch and other just random collectible stuff that I have. Some of you out there in the PSK have requested that, so I'm going to try and get it cleaned up to do that for you here in either February or March. We will get that out to you. And I've got some other figures to unbox. We'll get to some other stuff. Make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, and as always, take her easy.